So, Moneyball. The 2011 hit starring Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill told the true story of the Oakland A's, a baseball team raided of its best stars and took a revolutionary approach in terms of how to rebuild. They followed sabermetrics, a maths-based philosophy championed by Bill James, on how to defeat the baseball establishment by finally recognising the undervalued and underappreciated talent that existed in the major baseball leagues. Now, in one of the final scenes of the film, Brad Pitt's Billy Beane sits in a ballroom at Fenway Park across from Red Sox owner John Henry, discussing if sabermetrics held the key to resolving one of sport's most famous curses.
Curse of the Bambino.
Just 2 years after the real-life iteration of said conversation, the Red Sox won the first World Championship for 86 years, and the World Championship finally returned to Beantown. Now, if some of these names, John Henry, Fenway Park, sound quite familiar, isn't just because of baseball. 6 years after the Red Sox won their title, Fenway Sports Group, fronted by John Henry, led a bid and eventually purchased Liverpool Football Club over in England, where they recreated similar successes, ending Liverpool's 30-year wait for the English League and also becoming champions of Europe for the 6th time. Obviously, this was different from their successes in Major League Baseball, but one thing remained prevalent in all of FSG business approaches: that was a reliance on statistics above all else. And no club has leaned more into the statistics side of football than little old Brentford, the club that has climbed from the 4th division all the way to now fighting with the big boys in the Premier League. This is the story of how the Bees beat football. We're in 2004, it's a different world. Lance Armstrong has, completely cleanly, just won his 6th Tour de France. Facebook's being launched, but most importantly, fox hunting's been banned from the UK. But despite this shocking legislation harming many in West London, there are still some positives for those in that part of the world. Notably, Chelsea and the Roman Abramovich is splashing the cash, with Didier Drogba and Petr Cech coming through the door. However, in the same neck of the woods, a little club called Brentford had just finished 4th in League One. Not exactly a thrilling season on the pitch, but that wasn't a bad omen for Brentford fan and professional sports gambler Matthew Benham, who was launching his new business, Smart Odds. Smart Odds algorithms are extensively protected, but in short, it aimed to give a level of access to the statistics and algorithm that Benham had used to become so successful at the gambling table, consulting clients on the best possible bets that are out there, grounded in one key aspect: the data. In the coming years, Smart Odds would become a roaring success, but the same sadly cannot be said for Brentford. They continue to slip into obscurity, and by 2007 have been relegated again, now languishing in League Two and in financial difficulty. So here is where our story really begins, as Benham stepped in, first with a loan to save his boyhood club from collapse, and then purchasing it completely in 2012. By 2014, he'd also purchased Danish side FC Midtjylland and began to test out his football-adjusted sabermetric approach. Just a year later, Midtjylland won their first ever Danish Super League. This was enough convincing that Benham needed to start applying these concepts to Brentford. The change was swift. Those with experience were thrown out the door, and instead they were replaced by people that were more mathematically driven and more logical in their approach, such as Rasmus Atkinson, who was put as co-director of football at the club. Additionally, Brentford's entire philosophy changed. In short, they gave up trying to win games. It's all grounded in the philosophy that winning games is actually a poor metric to judge a team's performance in the long term. Think of it this way: how many times have you been to watch your team batter or get battered for 90 minutes, and then one goal in the 97th minute decided it all? That's not an accurate reflection of the game and how in the long term these two teams will perform. It's just what happened on that day. Instead, Brentford pioneered expected goals. Now, XG is a known part of football today, but it wasn't back then, if you're unfamiliar with it. In general, all it does is it tallies together all of the chances that are created and compares them to the chances that those chances are converted into goals, and through that can create an estimation of a scoreline and overall an estimation of a league table and how a team is actually performing. In doing so in the long term, this should, next to relegate luck as a factor, and actually just show the quality of each team. And in the Brentford approach, this is exactly what they did, trying to eliminate luck and the things you can't account for in football, but in the long term, just trying to look at the cold, hard numbers that were available to them. And if you win enough games on XG, the plan is that you'll win enough games in reality, and win enough games in reality, you'll get promoted. And promoted they were in the following years. They'd been promoted from League Two, League One, and by 2014 had climbed their way back up to the Championship, whilst Benham's other side were winning the Danish Super League. So Moneyball was working, and Benham decided to even go a step further, putting all his eggs in the Moneyball basket, when in 2015-16 he closed Brentford's academy. Now, closing academies isn't an entirely unheard of move, but Brentford's philosophy behind it was quite different. Instead of taking a player for 10 years and developing him slowly, they realised that was not actually a financially valuable solution, especially for much smaller clubs like Brentford. It was an outdated system, and instead you look to consolidate these resources with the construction of a B team of 17 to 20-year-olds that could actually perform now and actually have an impact eventually on the first team, and how you could get better results, better XG, and climb further up the league. For smaller clubs, Brentford reasoned that academies were more or less pointless. The best players already went to the top academies. If you're in the second division, your pulling power was very much limited. So why even bother? Who are you actually going to produce, especially in terms of the long term? Progressing forwards, they're either going to be stole by one of the bigger clubs, or they're just really not going to be good enough for you and enough to drive Brentford where Benham wanted them to go. But again, I'm just telling you how this works out. The reality is, this decision was not made with that in mind. It was all underpinned by data-driven models. The academy restructure was a massive part of Benham's plan, and Brentford's rethinking of what a professional football club should look like, taking away these traditional aspects of academies and trying to put forward their own interpretation of events. As Rasmus Atkinson would say, you really needed to look at the story of David and Goliath. For David to beat Goliath, he needed a different weapon. That's what Brentford's all about. At Brentford, they came to the conclusion it took around 30 games to show a player's value. That a lot of clubs weren't patient enough for this. If you didn't hit the ground running straight away, you were more or less out the door. But Brentford were able to take this chance, being a lower and smaller division club. They looked for value where others wrote players off as simply not good enough, and were able to sign the likes of Neil Maupay, Saïd Benrahma, Ollie Watkins. All showed their class at Brentford and were eventually sold for massive profits. And no player was more of a Moneyball, an example of this, than Ivan Toney. Ivan Toney is the archetypal Moneyball Benham player. At a big club in the Premier League in Newcastle, he was overlooked and not appreciated. So what happened? He was cast down the leagues after just 2 first-team appearances and deemed not good enough. Where the Magpies saw nothing, Brentford saw value and were able to pick him up for a measly £700,000. And he was an absolute goal machine. He broke the Championship goal scoring record, and with his 31 goals last season, fired Brentford to the promised land of the Premier League. Meanwhile, at Newcastle, if you look at their striking options, are nowhere near the value of Toney. Chris Wood's just been signed for big money. Joselu was a bit of a failure, and Joe Linton's now being converted into central midfield. None to the level of Ivan Toney. Toney symbolises everything Brentford and Benham is meant to be about. All about value where everyone else writes them off. It's how you're able to climb up these leagues when no one else trusted that a system that had never been tried before could actually work. Just like it did in Moneyball when Brad Pitt and John Hill were ridiculed by the baseball elite, all until they started winning. But now the question comes. It's one of the biggest challenges Brentford have and will ever face. Everybody knows what Brentford's Moneyball idea is. It's looking for value when no one else sees it. So now when Brentford are rumoured of a player before they could go under the radar, now everyone in the league will know that statistically this player is performing to a high level. Now with this in mind, can the Moneyball approach work in the billionaire's boy club where Manchester United, Liverpool and Chelsea have just so much money to throw at everybody else? They'll just look and find these valuable players before the likes of Brentford even have a chance. Nevertheless, despite this Moneyball being an open secret, we're not the only people to make videos on this, Brentford are still buzzing away comfortably in 14th, and they're looking for their second successive season in the top flight since 1936. So it kind of doesn't matter if it's going to work at the big stage. It's already worked enough for a size of Brentford to take in hundreds of millions of pounds that otherwise they would never have had a chance of getting near. Brentford have changed the game in terms of what it means, especially in the lower divisions. Go back to Moneyball. Remember Brad Pitt's character Billy Bean? Well, in 2017, he's been involved with a takeover of Barnsley Football Club, the birthplace of John Stones, England's greatest centre-half, and I'll never hear a word against that. Now, Barnsley have had mixed fortunes. I'm not going to deny that. It's not been just an upward curve, but it's the closest they've come to the Premier League last year in 24 years when they found themselves in the Championship playoff positions. The reality is, as Barnsley has shown by imitating them, Brentford has changed what we think of as a modern football club, and in a sport that's always been so scared to change, Moneyball might have just left it no choice. The reality of global sport is that once Bill James wrote his 1985 book and published Sabermetrics and effectively solved baseball, global sport crossed the event horizon. It completely changed forever. It was just a matter of time before we saw this play out in football. It's effectively already worked to an extent and continues to work with them sitting in 14th. But the real moment in which Brentford have beaten football is that they're going to continue to. For as Rasmus Atkinson says, life's too short to be a mid-table team. And I don't see Brentford hanging around for too long. If they can invest more and more in their statistical approach, invest in more and more of the better players, just watch them climb up the league and they'll be upsetting someone before too long. But until then, I guess the only things that are left to say is that quit. Ollie's back with the next one. He's much better doing this with me. It's a bit crap when I do it on my own. I'm just not as good at it. But I think he's back for the next one. So see.